Obviously, you would have heard Pippa's wonderful presentation earlier. My name's Steve. I'm Senior Gardener at Sheffield Park. I've had the joy of being able to basically be given these tiny tags that were under Pippa's desk and asked to run with it, which has been absolutely delightful. So I'll talk you through some of the data. And obviously, if you have any questions at any point, just talk. I mean, the last group just ended up being a conversation, didn't it? Yeah, and we've got plenty of anecdotes and stories from our time spent with various different people. But what you can see in front of you here, and in front of you on your laps, is a map of where all of our tiny tags are around the garden. So we've got 10 temperature ones in total. The tiny tags you can buy online. They're about £120. They're literally called Tiny Tag 2. If you've got a bit more money, you can buy the wireless ones and it goes to a website and then you can just log on instead of having to go out and download the data onto your laptop straight away. What we've also got, which is part of Pippa's presentation, is we've got the rainfall gauge, which is on our main lawn. That's number 11. And then we've got our soil moisture readers, which are number 12, which is near our Pinus Montezuma, Sheffield Park, and 13, which is near our Garden for the Future. Now, the rationale behind putting some of these readers out has been because we want to confirm what we already think. And we need the data to back it up. And some of the reasons we put them out is because we don't actually know what's going on there because it's a microclimate. And to explain a little bit of the science briefly behind Sheffield Park is that we have got 18 acres of lake. The water evaporates from the lake and it stays in the atmosphere. And then the trees around the lakes use that water to obviously send water up and down their systems. So we have got various conifers, various trees that are around the lakes that are doing really well at Sheffield Park, and they won't necessarily be doing very well in other places in the UK or even 10 miles up the road or even 50 steps in that direction, because that is the microclimate of Sheffield Park. So what we've got here are some average maximums that were taken from the first little bit of data collection that we did. We have data that runs up to now, effectively, which you'll see on a couple of slides, but it's very generic. And you can see that we've got quite a range of temperatures at different times during the year. So one of the things that we would expect is that number 7, Tiny Tag 7, Queen's Walk, is the coldest area of the garden. It should be the coldest area. It's the lowest point in the garden. It's where one of our tributaries comes in. So we've got various wildlife that live down there, which is great. And through our work, it has been confirmed that it is the coldest area of the garden. Something that was really fascinating for us is the new Garden for the Future has turned out to be the second coldest area of the garden, which we weren't expecting. That was a real surprise for us. So again, how's that going to influence the planting that's been carried out there, the things that we've put in there that were on that orange list that Pippa was talking about in her presentation? And this is what it looks like on a scale. So you can see lots of spikes. So if any of you fancy doing this, wherever you work, a few top tips: you buy the tiny tags, you get a set of instructions with them. You have to put them at roughly 1.2 meters. You can put them at a different height, but as long as they're the same, they have to go on the north side of the tree. We use zip wires on ours, but ensured that there was enough excess within it so that as the tree put on annual growth each year with its rings, we then had the ability to maneuver those ties. We made sure that we went and checked them, especially after school holidays and half terms, because turns out kids quite like moving things that hangs off trees. Who'd have thought that? Yeah, that's so as you can see here, where Pippa's just skipped on. So this is a different data set, which is up to July 2025. So that's our first year-long. Our first year-long data set. And you can see various different spikes in the garden. Initially, when we put them out, what we found was that in certain places, the sun was where it was setting. We were then getting a spike on the tiny tag because it was getting full sun. So that's when we had to just maybe change the tree it was on or look at the setting to get the most accurate readings. So that's what quite a few of those little dips are at the start, but then you can see it sorts itself out as it goes on. And this was from Bristol University. This was a general summary of what we were seeing within the garden. So what was the maximum change, what was the average change, what was the minimum change, based on climate modelling, which is from the Met Office, which runs over 90 years. And you can see that on a 4 degrees uplift, then we would roughly get a 4 degrees change in the summer, and then in the winter, it would be more like a 3 degrees change. And then you've got the temperature range there as well, because we've got parts of the garden that will go from, it can be 6 degrees at night, and then it'll be 20 degrees by 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I mean, that's a lot of pressure on a tree stock of over 8,000 trees, wildlife, which we'll talk about the biodiversity side of the garden as well. This is our daily precipitation. So if you can remember last September, it was wet. It was really wet down south. I presume it was, yeah, normal here, bless. This year, September for us, was really wet again. So we've got a data set from 1960 to the year 2000 that was from a local farm where he'd go out, the farmer went out and checked his rain gauge every day. So we've got a gap in the system between year 2000 and 2024. So one of the things that we're trying to work out through historical data is, okay, has there actually been a trend? Were there any drop-offs? Like, can we start to fill in that data as we start to receive more data as well?
The quite boring thing about this aspect, for going back to the spreadsheets that I mentioned in my presentation, is our peak season for visitors as a property is autumn and Christmas and Easter. But our overflow car park, as with most National Trust places, is a field. So if we're going to have peak surges of visitors, and that's where ultimately my income is generated from and the business is, then that's the business bit then supports the remainder of the year when it's not quite as busy. But if our overflow is a field and we know that we are going to be wet and it's getting wetter because that's what it's predicting, again, in relation to just really being able to go, right, okay, what is this going to do to our business model? What is this going to do to our visitor numbers? Because we also know people don't necessarily like coming out in the rain. So we don't actually need the overflow car park in the rain because no one comes out. So that also is the other aspect, because we are garden only, we don't have a property, so that kind of will change the narrative and the business model opportunity around what is actually happening to our business in relation to it being a viable business going forward into the future. So that is some of the other side that isn't about climate, but actually is the reality of actually us managing a landscape in its entirety, isn't it?
Absolutely. So this graph talks about humidity. I'm not going to bore people with the data around humidity, but if there was a key takeaway from today, we talk about temperature a lot with trees. Can they withstand temperatures? I'd just like to switch your focus and say, well, actually, can they withstand humidity? Because if you look at places like Kew, there is no humidity in the air. It is pure heat. In the summer, heat radiates off the ground. There's no grass. It gets stuck and bounces back. If you go to Wisley have got a new piece of planting by their entrance. It's a load of cherry trees, but the sunlight bounces off the pavement and bounces to the underside of the leaves and scorches them, and there is no humidity in that area to support those trees. We are very lucky. We have 18 acres of lake and we have natural springs coming out of everywhere, which means that we have pockets where trees are supported, and that's why we have these microclimates. And we get it all the time, don't we? In the summer, we're walking and you're like, oh, it's a bit chilly. You put a layer on, you literally have walked 20 meters up there and you've gone, oh, do you know, I'm a bit hot. And it doesn't make any sense, but we're now starting to get some sense, and a lot of the research that's being carried out by Kevin Martin at Kew, Andy Hirons, people like that, if you look at their research papers, they talk about something called vapor pressure deficit, and it is the ability for a tree to be able to perform that gaseous exchange and absorb water through leaves, and how that then affects the wood density of the tree. So we're now seeing examples at Sheffield Park of trees that haven't been doing well for the last 10, 12 years, but suddenly, because they've luckily been planted in the right place, which is close to a natural spring, even with the heat, they're getting a water source, and those trees are now flowering. And they haven't flowered, as I say, for five, six years, planted 10 years ago. So it really is magical what just that little bit of water provides. This one, I'll point this out, this is soil. We've got some soil readers in the ground. We actually study our molehills to learn about our soil, because they're the best provider of subsoil for us. But you see these lines here that are on your graphs? That is a saturation point. It can't take any more water. So what we're fascinated in is, at what point does this sensor saturate compared to the precipitation levels? And then we go into that area and look at what is struggling and what's doing really well and what has been planted. Because in some cases, with our planting that we do in the future, when we're talking about right tree, right place, some of it might be that actually we need to absorb the water out of the ground, because we've got some mature specimens that need more support with all the interlocking and mycorrhizal network that's underneath the ground with the root systems. And we've got one of those slap bang in the middle of our garden for the future on a walk that is called Wet Walk. Because it's wet. So funnily enough, that soil reader is saturated a lot. But then you look around and there are swamp cypress, but that's the extreme of what we would be seeing in this half an acre of garden that's been re-landscaped. Would you like to talk a little bit about that, or do you want to scoot on? Because there's the picture of the boardwalk, which is...
It's not the next one. So this is a different
further.
one. So this is Garden of the Future that I was talking about in the presentation. And while we're talking about water connected to it, the bit that you can see, the hard standing, as it were, that's here in front of you, when Jake lifted that up, there was a spring underneath it, wasn't there? We had no idea. So there was nothing showing on the ground that it was wet. There was nothing running out anywhere. But then it was like, oh, okay, we're going to need to do something else then, because we've just found this magical spring that we just had no idea. It's not on any historical maps. There's no drainage system nearby where there's a pipe that might have burst. But I guess that's also kind of like the challenges of all of our landscapes, isn't it? It's actually, you can do quite a lot of research, but sometimes you just don't really know.
Absolutely. So, moving on to the piece of work we've done with Q. So, if you take the Bristol University work, where it's kind of the day-to-day analysis of temperature with some climate modelling through the Met Office tied in, the piece of work that we've been able to carry out with Q, which has been down to Pippa and poking people to make it happen. What we have are a set of guidelines that tell us that roughly 10% of our collection won't be suitable for the future at Sheffield Park. Like, broadly speaking, we've got 86%, which should do well in the future. But again, with these microclimates that we've got around the garden, there might be parts of that 86% that won't work in 50% of our landscape, and vice versa with the other areas. The endemic one at the end, what that basically means is that there haven't been enough surveys carried out in the wild of that tree for it to actually be given a data set, which it requires 24,000, I believe, surveys in the wild. So a lot of those black dots that were put up, some of them, because we don't know the parentage of the species, some of them because there isn't enough information. And there's that information there. Yeah, it's fascinating. So, this is what the data set looks like.
Did you have a question about that?
Oh, sorry.
I was just wondering how much you know about where the trees were originally planted for the microclimates, or whether that's something you're thinking about more recently, or microclimates have been developing more with climate change. change, or all of the above?
So the majority of microclimates have come from two things. They've come from the water table and where the water table sits and drops and what have you, and natural erosion. And the other place that it's come from is the 87 storm, where we lost just over 2,000 trees and you had to climb into the garden, and root systems and land drains were completely destroyed. The pictures are utterly incredible. A lot of the blue sky you see at Sheffield Park now around the lakes is because of the 87 storm. It would have been a tree canopy. So you've got these areas now where water just sits because there was a tree there. I'm trying to think of a good example of that. In the Arboretum, there's a good example. I know it looks like we're a woodland garden, but one of our character areas is called an Arboretum, where we have got an area that you will normally go into in July, and it's soaking wet, and we get our mower stuck. And this is the first year I've been at Sheffield Park, nearly 5 years, and it's the first year I've been in there in July, and it's been bone dry. And that is where a natural spring has come up as a result of a lime tree that fell over during the 87 storm and has created a divot.
It is one of the things that we're also mindful of as we're doing quite a lot of thinning work as well, because we're like quite overstocked in certain areas. So we'll also be looking at the data of what that then does, because if we need more air, we've not got enough air circulation in the garden. So if we're creating that air circulation, what is that then doing? Data's just not around, it's just not there. So it's a fine balance of like, you're doing a little bit, but enough that you can see something, but you then, it's not like you can shove it back in, is it? Like that you've not gone too far.
Yeah.
So it is this, I almost feel a little bit like, it's a bit like a cha-cha slide of like, we do a little bit, have a minute and see what that's telling us then of the data and what we're understanding from that. Do we just need to let that settle for a while, because we've got massive landscape? So how we then kind of distribute what it is that we're doing, then how nature then is responding. And I guess not that slide, the other slide about, no, I'll wait till we get to the other slide about Garden for the Future and the net gain stuff with the slides.
Yeah.
So are you monitoring the changes that you're making?
Yeah.
In a number of different ways. So one of the things on a almost separate note is how we archive information as well, because we've had to find a lot of this stuff that has been behind the filing cabinet 2 drawers down, which dropped off 5 years. It's utterly ridiculous where some of this information is. So that is a conversation that we'll continue to have around how the next generation takes forward. But it's through repeating the testing that we've been carrying out. So in Garden for the Future, for example, before the landscaping took place, we carried out a baseline survey for butterflies, bees, dragonflies. We've had roughly a 500% uplift in our butterfly activity. The year before was, it didn't really count because it rained all summer and it was a terrible year. And obviously the butterfly conservation charity came out and we've got a real problem with butterflies. And obviously there is a problem with butterflies that has been for 50 years. But also you were thinking in the back of your head, well, if we get a dry summer, that would be a bit more helpful to make this a bit more comparable. And yeah, literally we've had 500% more butterflies in there. Brilliant. New dragonfly identified on site, Northern Hawker, which gets you 9 or 10 points in the dragonfly UK table, which I'm sure you all know that. So we have the most dragonfly species in the southeast of England for a National Trust property. Over 90 specimens of bird enjoy Sheffield Park and is a home. We've got a group of entomology volunteers now that are studying beetles and our aquatic invertebrates as well, great crested newts. It is, when we talk about botanical places, grade 1 listed, grade 2 listed sites, sometimes we forget in the climate conversation that there are all these other things that call our place a home, and we have to care and nurture for them and think about them for any of the testing that we're doing.
Prior to us making the intervention of Garden for the Future as well, within that landscape is a beautiful veteran oak, and we had a survey done beforehand of if we make an intervention around this landscape and it looks like this with these plant species, what will that do to this oak tree? Because there's no way that we can make an intervention that is going to have any form of detrimental impact on a veteran oak. And what was really interesting about it is through the research that they did, is what they were saying is that the oak would get net gain. And now when you're seeing these type of statistics that Steve mentioned, there's no wonder the oak is getting net gain out of those interventions, because actually look at the wildlife that is thriving around that wasn't there previously. So there's also monitoring around what that veteran oak does, because we've got so many old ancient veteran trees in the garden. If as and when we have to make an intervention in the landscape, because we will continue to need to make interventions in the landscape, how are we going to do that whilst we're still nurturing these significant trees and significant landscape in the middle of it that is not detrimental to those ancient and veteran trees that are within the landscape also. So there's also a little bit of, well, a lot of learning in that as well, is how we do that well.
Absolutely. Should we just skip through? We'll get to these. So this Q were very kind, and Kevin Martin put our climate modelling data through the algorithm that he has come up with to give us some information of what our climate might look like over the next 30, 50, 70 years. So you can see annual temperature goes up to 13.8, and then we think about the Bristol University climate modelling that's happened as well. So it's just like when you're getting your back garden done and you're getting landscaping quotes, you don't normally just get one, do you? You get two or three, but we want to be able to compare and see what they look like. So you can see that's going up. Annual precipitation, so our winters are going to be wetter, but it's the intensity of the rain. The summers could be wetter, but again, it's the intensity of the rain. Our autumn colour, which we are grade 1 listed for, on Friday, we had a tree. We've got a tree called a Nyssa sinensis. We've got the largest collection of Nyssa tree in the UK, Tupelo tree from North America, brilliant tree for the future. Try and get it in the parks. That tree turns this amazing peachy orange. It was full canopy. Rain on Monday, was done. Gone, autumn colour, completely finished. And that's literally what we're having to deal with now. I'm trying to think of another.
There is some quite nice respite in that, though, because that means that we don't have quite many visitors, so we can have a hot minute to do stuff like this.
This is very true. We can do our normal jobs. So this is the key one for us. So again, talking about humidity and that evapotranspiration, so the evaporation and then the transpiration that happens in the air into plants. For us, that should go up. So we will be able to continue to grow weird and wonderful things at Sheffield Park and Garden, and have areas of our garden that are closer to what you might potentially see in Cornwall and some of the things that they can grow, which would be awesome. This is Royal Holloway. So this is our photosynthesis drones, or our photosynthesis drones, their photosynthesis drones that have been mapping photosynthesis levels. And what you can see there, the warm colours, you can change it on the survey, like when you're playing around with colours, it can go from cold to hot, hot to cold, but it basically means where is it getting the strongest readings. So on this one, I actually said to the last group that it was the hot colours that were showing signs of struggling. It's not actually, it's the other way around, because I made that mistake before. So the hot colours are where we're getting strong levels of photosynthesis. The cooler colours, and you can see where a lot of our specimens are because of the dots that are all around, that's where we're not getting as much photosynthesis. And if you look in here, we have got a ridiculous amount of trees that are too close to each other. So that makes perfect sense as to why they're not necessarily photosynthesizing. What it also brings up are the natural springs that we can see dotted around in the landscape as well, which is really helpful because, for example, we never knew that we actually had some water pooling in this part of the garden, which is near quite a special tree.
So we've only, at the moment, we've only got one window, so we've had one capture from last year of this. This year's capture of data that they've done, because we want to compare year on year what that looks like, is in my inbox behind a firewall. Open. So the next challenge is IT related of how we access that data. So that again, when we access that data, we'll be really interested in looking at that, to looking at this in relation to what that's looking like year on year in relation to is the season shifting and what that's doing.
So is this like a time lapse sort of course of period of time for photosynthesis as an
No, it's one point in time. So the key for, we obviously would like to have drones up in the air almost on a seasonal basis. But the most important thing for this piece of testing is that it happens at the same time of year, each year. So we can map changes to where thinning work's been carried out. Obviously this one was, well, I say obviously this was carried out in September. So it's giving us an indication of maybe what might autumn colour start to look like at Sheffield Park. But one of the things with any testing is then you're trying to work out, okay, well, how can you link something to this testing as well? Like, is there something on the ground we can be doing? As part of our worms experiment, which Pippa mentioned, the company that are doing it have agreed to carry out photosynthesis testing or fluorescence testing on some new car park trees that we've planted, which have been planted following the Tree Design Action Group document that was made available back in 2015, I think, and is an absolutely brilliant document for urban landscapes. If you've not got that, get it, because it will literally give you a guide, and you can click on the tree and it will tell you what sort of spot is it suitable for, does it need a sustainable drainage system. It's absolutely fantastic. But they shine a light into the leaf and it's milliseconds, but it will map photosynthesis for you, how quickly it responds. So we should be able to take our photosynthesis radar readings and take those trees and do a comparison and say, well, hang on a minute, this radar is showing us that we're getting high levels of photosynthesis, but we've done an on-the-ground photosynthesis test and actually this tree's struggling. What's going on there? So it's just that ability to continue to be curious. Spend a lot of time trying to disprove ourselves, in fairness, don't we?
Well, it gives us the argument. We were saying in the last group that I was saying that John's slide that came up with all of the pests and diseases, we've got IPS we are there on his chart of IPS people that's coming in. And one of the questions in the previous group was around how you can narrate the type of plant stock, because actually sometimes the system says no. And we're in that position where, because we'll be getting funding, we've got to do a cell in one of the woodlands with the spruce connected to IPS. And as part of that, you obviously get funding, and you get funding then to replant. And we had a really interesting conversation because they obviously have a list of stuff that you can use. And we were saying, well, we want to use those, but we're not using those because the research that we've got says that in our landscape, that's not going to work. So it was a really interesting conversation because it is almost like computer says no. It's like, well, you can't have those because it's not on the list. But actually, because we've got the science that we can then go, well, actually, can we have a look at this and have a conversation, please? Because the aim of this is to replant in a landscape that is going to survive the future. That's what your objective is. We're saying that we'll achieve that by doing this. So we're also part of the pilot project for that. So that also is enabling us, the science is enabling us to just appropriately push back where you need to. And what we're hoping then is, as part of the fact that we are a pilot, that it makes it easier for others, that then you might have more things on the list, or you might have more of an opportunity of a conversation rather than here is 10 trees that you can pick and that's kind of all you've got from the pots, as it were.
I think this is quite a funny thing that really you're going back to what 100 years ago, 200 years ago, a gardener would have told you that won't grow there because of this. It's almost like there's a massive gap now in knowledge.
Yeah.
That those gardeners that, let's be fair, was a career base for a long time, those gardeners have all of a sudden gone. That knowledge is now gone and lost. I don't know what records you've got written sort of about the area and about the park, but you've almost lost that local knowledge to that area. You know, the springs, the gardeners that were maintaining it originally would have known that that's always a wet spot. It only dries out in certain years when it's dry. You know, they know that springs might pop up, they know what signs to look for. they know the temperature variations. I mean, this is repeatable in gardens across the country, isn't it? That are very specialist in those things, and now you're having to apply quite a scientific approach to try and get that information back.
I think there's twofold with that. I think there is local knowledge as we transition, because culturally we're a transient workforce now, aren't you? How many people now are 30 years in a job, in a career?
Yeah.
And actually the younger generation, that's even less, isn't it? They'd recommend 8 years and move on because you come stagnant. So actually that culturally is our work environment.
Yeah.
But the big thing for me in relation to, although I joked in my presentation about spreadsheets, we are not the decision makers. You can't have a hunch anymore. You can't have on the ground local knowledge, because in our culture it is not valued anymore. You have to have the data, you have to have the science, and this is the bit for me around where my role as general manager comes in, is I feel like I'm a communication conduit between, we can see that there, I know that, we know that, but actually if I'm wanting to talk to a director, an ABO, a senior finance person that's going to give me money, a grant body, me saying, well, our gardeners have got a hunch and I've had a look at it and it's looking a little raggedy, ain't going to work. This is what you need, because actually, traditionally, it's almost a little bit like we're nature deficit disorder, because we don't even value that over anymore, do we? So when we go back to the earlier presentations around nature deficit disorder, we're doing the same thing ourselves, because we're not valuing hunches, we're not valuing information, we're not valuing the fact that, well, it's always been like that and now it's not, so something's changed. So I think
That's the keeping sort of got lost in translation. I think that's worked in farming, that's worked in all sort of environmental sectors, because obviously climate change, you know, farmers separated fields based on what they could grow and stuff in the past. It's
an interesting journey, isn't it? So I also think connected to it in relation to how we communicate is even within our own sectors, you know, the way we talk on property as operators and deliverers, to how I need to have a conversation with my chief finance officer, I've needed to learn a different language. Because I can't say, well, that's looking a bit raggedy, because you don't even know what the word raggedy means. It's like, that's exactly it, isn't it? It's actually, it's like how we as a sector we're finding it difficult to communicate across our own expertise and professionals even within the sector. So how do we then communicate externally for people that don't even sit within our sector? It's actually super complicated, isn't it?
5 minutes.
I was at an event for horticulture apprentices recently, and we had a discussion on how they felt AI was going to impact their career, and the primary concern with AI was eliminating hunches, instinct, and the kind of happy mistake. Because you're always trying to get things based on data and you're not going on instinct. So that's really interesting.
So I can give you an example, and that's kind of this slide here. So this is root tomography. So the Arboretum character area that I look after, I've spoken to old gardeners. We've got someone who lives in the local village who was there for 49 years, knows the landscape inside out, like back of his hand. And you're looking at trees and you're going, well, why is that? Why is that doing that? And that goes back to the 1970s, like Klausmatic body language of trees. Like you're still carrying out those visual tree assessments and using your eyes and understanding, why is that tree grown like that? Why is that axis doing that? Why is this part of the buttress? Why is the trunk doing this? What's that cambial column doing? Oh, there's a bridge there, la-di-da-di-da. So you make that assumption, and then we can go to science and go, hey, let's do some testing. Let's try and back this up. Let's try and find out if this is actually doing what we think it should be doing. And this is from a tree called Pinus Montezuma, Sheffield Park. And it is a very famous tree. It's one of horticulture's mystery. No one knows where it came from. There's 5 or 6 mature trees in cultivation. The earliest was planted in Greyswood over at Surrey in 1880, 1883, around those dates. Ours was planted in 1910. It's a very selfish tree. It's an absolutely stunning tree. It's now been propagated. It was propagated in the early 2000s. It will cost you roughly £4,000 to buy it in cultivation, and it's probably about that big. But we wanted to know, where are these roots going? Because its biggest issue is wind throw. It lives in the highest points of Mexican mountains, so it could easily fall over at any point. So we carried out this root tomography, and it's got one root that is twice the length of all the other roots. Around the tree, every other root system, you can see there is a tree blocking that root. It doesn't want to share its nutrients. It's very much like black walnut. It doesn't want to create that wonderful mycorrhizal worldwide web underneath. It's going, nope, this is mine. I'm perfectly happy here. The one gap that this tree has is that big root that goes all the way down, twice as long, 20 meters as any other root, and it heads directly to a natural spring. And the natural spring wasn't there before the 87 storm. That's another good one, because there were 4 lime trees that blew over during the 87 storm. And you can see from the grass that you've actually got sedges and rushes and various other things growing in there. And that is where that tree gets that nutrient. So any landscape succession plans that we change, any felling that we do, we will absolutely not plant anything in that area to continue to support that tree. And interestingly, that area of the garden is also one of the highest humidity areas of the garden as well, which must be coming from the natural springs that are coming in that area, which is supporting this tree. So yeah, it's pretty magic, to be honest with you. And the tree's absolutely incredible.
Has anybody got any questions? As we have 1 minute left, is anyone like to delve into a little bit more?
I think getting back to the gentleman's point in terms of the historic knowledge of the garden, it's almost you're starting with new knowledge now of the clientele. You can't guarantee what happened 100 years ago is the same as what
No, gosh, no. Back in the early 1900s, they transported tens of thousands of tons of soil from the parkland to the garden and completely changed the landscape. The landscape dates back to pre-1066, Battle of Hastings. You know, we've got drawings from the 1700s where you can see where the capability brown planting and the landscape was created towards Sheffield Wood. You've had various different owners back in the 1400s, but there's enough nuggets that have been left in Sheffield Park's history that you can cling on to. It's not like a family where the family's always lived in that property for hundreds of... So there's a property further up from us called Board Hill. They have got every single letter ever written, and Board Hill is based on Q in its layout. A lot of our information was put in a fire. Well, it wasn't put in a fire. There was a fire and it burned. And the third Earl went bankrupt as well, didn't he? And sold off a lot of his paintings and what have you. So
When we had the Canadians based
those,
war as well,
yeah, those are the areas that we're able, through local knowledge as well, to just start piecing those bits of puzzles together, which is joyful, to be perfectly honest with you, because it feels like every day is a different day and you're learning something new.
I think with sites like this, though, I mean, they're obviously not native anyway, so you can sort of, like I deal with more parks and native species and stuff, so there's this sort of, oh, things need to stay static, things need to stay the same. That's not going to happen through climate change. You're going to have to adapt to some degree. That's come through change. You know, some gardener's got something, someone's got something from some part of the world and gone, let's put that in there. This grew up in the mountains, okay, let's put it in a similar type of environment. This comes through a humid area, we'll put it in a humid part of the garden. And I suppose that's the nice thing with this is you can always look to the future, is you don't have to keep those species that are already there.
Ah, absolutely.
You can move on and change into
Definitely.
that fear of like a backlash and say, well, you know, going back 200 years, someone was doing this anyway, so we're only adapting to change. It's a bit like historic homes, isn't it? You can't change the style of the house yet, but it was changed in the 1920s. It's been changed for hundreds of years prior to that anyway. You should be able to adapt and change it to fit.
Definitely.
That's now in the future.
That's literally the conversation we were having in the car, weren't it?
Yeah.
The last group, just to finish off, we were talking about native trees, and it was like, well, if dinosaurs could look at ginkgos, however many millions of years ago, I think ginkgos are a pretty good thing to plant, even though they're not, you know.
Still do quite well.
Yeah, exactly, right.